Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, bigs are taking center stage. I'm going to break down where the situation stands with Jonas Valančiūnas and some possible resolutions for the Denver Nuggets. Then we're going to take a little walk through the Western Conference, the land of the Giants, and ask whether small ball is officially dead. Stay tuned. Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean, and as you can see, I am doing the pod solo today. Will is back on vacation. He's got a lot of friends, having a lot of weddings lately, so good for him. I know I'm going to have my own stint of that at some point in the summer. Nice to see everyone joining us in the chat here. She loved Tommy. Now we got some mailbag questions from you. Okay. So first thing I have to do with this show today is a sound check. So please let me know if you guys can hear me. I'm going to need a little bit of help from the chat today to help me get through the show technically with Will out today. So if everyone or someone could let me know if you guys can actually hear me on the other side of this, that would be fantastic. Hello, Johnny. Let's see here. Great. Thank you, Sheila Tommy. All right. Sound check is good. got through that part of the notes. Okay. So a couple programming notes as we go through the show today. Like I said, solo show. So you're going to have to forgive my constantly broken train of thought as I try to sort of monologue my way through the show while monitoring the chat and handling the tech on the back end. I'm going to try to multitask like a bear on a unicycle, but I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride. Like I said, the topics we're going through today are Jonas Valančiūnas. We're going to talk about all the bigs in the Western Conference and where Denver stands in that picture. But we also have a mailbag segment, and I know we're going to have a lot of questions throughout the night with the chat. I'll try to stop and answer questions from the chat and kind of bring up your comments as we go if they're topical to what we're talking about. But if they're not, I'll ask you to refrain from asking them until we get to the mailbag segment so that I can actually get to them, because I don't know how to save chats for later on this program yet. So any tangents or more elaborate questions, save until the mailbag segment. We'll try to get to everything. Let's see here. Okay, so the other thing is Summer League actually starts tonight, and I've got a little graphic for that here. So this is the Denver Nuggets Summer League schedule. We'll be back next week to break down some film from the first couple of Summer League games. Denver plays their first Summer League game against the Bucks tonight. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing Deron Holmes try to balance his newfound strength, because we've gotten a lot of reports that he's looking a lot bigger than he was last year. Makes sense. He's gotten access to NBA trainers and NBA diets, etc., whatever they're feeding these boys, right? But also balancing that with fluidity and just kind of assessing how comfortable does he look out there, coming off of a year, not just with Achilles rehab, but just not playing organized basketball, right? And he is still technically a rookie, right? He didn't play any games his first year, so I'm going to give him a lot of leeway there, but I want to see him look comfortable or get comfortable. The other thing I'll be looking out for is Spencer Jones. Can you shoot? Right? He could shoot in college. He is the career leader in 3-point makes at our shared alma mater at Stanford. So that was all fine and dandy. He made 50% of his threes in the G League last year. But when it came to trying to make them at the NBA level, even in garbage time, that was a struggle. And if you see his shot form, you can see why. So I would like to see some of those shots go in, especially because he's the only two-way that Denver brought back. So clearly they see something in him. And he'd be a nice forward for us if he were to work out, right? He's got, defense and rebounding and all that, but you got to see what he can do on offense. The other note I've got here on Summer League is that Denver is still looking to fill another two-way spot, right? We already have Tamar Bates and Spencer Jones. But they might be, trying out these other guys on the Summer League team to see like who is a possible candidate for that last two-way spot. The other thing is Denver, I think the last 2 years has ended up filling their last two-way spot with somebody that wasn't on the Nuggets Summer League team. So it perhaps behooves you to, actually last year, in 23, they gave it to Braxton Key, who was not on our Summer League team. And last year it was Jay Huff. I guess it was Braxton Key and Jay Huff were not on our Summer League teams. Or maybe Braxton was and Jay was not. No, because Braxton, I remember, was, I think, on the Mavs Summer League team. So we had two guys that weren't on our Summer League team that got two-way spots. And then last year, I guess we had PJ, Trey, and Spencer. Okay, so I guess all of them. Spencer was not on our Summer League team last year. So he was the one. And they just kind of waited to fill that last spot. So that's another thing. Check out as many Summer League games as your heart desires from other teams as well, because one of these guys might end up on our team. They might also end up being guys that fight for the last standard roster spot as well. This is a thing that the NBA allows mid-season. If you want, you can convert a guy who's on a two-way contract to a standard roster spot if you want. The reason you would do that is if you wanted somebody to play in the playoffs. It's really the only reason, other than like maybe you want to lock them up for some period of time because they showed some promise and you want to get them on like a cheap deal. But you have to be on the standard roster in order to play in the playoffs. So theoretically, you could see, envision a scenario where like Spencer Jones just has a shooting breakout and then combine that with his defense. And it's like, we got to have this guy on the standard roster so that he's a playoff option. That's all I've got for Summer League for now. We're going to talk about it a lot more next week. Poppin, is it official now? Is what official now? The Denver transactions that have been made official are the MPJ for Cam Johnson trade, the Bruce Brown signing, and the Tim Hardaway Jr. signing, unless something happened since I started recording the show, and I don't see anything like that on the timeline yet. Where if you're talking about the Jonas situation, the trade is not official, but we're going to talk about it. It seems like all reports are that the trade is still going to go through. I don't know why it hasn't been made official yet. So hopefully that happens soon. Oh gosh. Hello, Hurricane. Let's see. Yeah, Poppin, I saw that Reddit post too. We're going to talk about it, but I don't know that we can trust that report necessarily. We had some input from our Nuggets Twitter's resident Serbian translator, Miroslav, and he's like, I don't know what to do with this. It's just kind of a crop job, and I can't find the article. So we shall see. All right. Please do me a favor, guys, and hit the like and subscribe buttons. And if I can find the... like and subscribe buttons really helps us out with the algorithm. We're trying to grow this channel. We blew past our 1,000 sub goal last week because the Jonas Valančiūnas story completely blew up. So that was really great. Our next goal is 1,500. We're currently at 1,050. So help us hit that. Will and I are planning to do a celebration of getting to 1,000 subs because that's a huge milestone, and I don't think we were really planning on getting there by this point when we first started this podcast. So thank you Johnny for the congrats, and yes, please remember to turn on notifications so that you don't miss a show. Yeah, it's actually it's funny because if you don't turn on notifications, it's almost like you didn't subscribe. Yeah, shout out to Big Val. Thanks for the drama. All right, let's get to our news here. All right, so we're starting with the Jonas Valanciunas situation. When we last left off in this show, anyway, last week, it was literally an hour after the initial reports about Donatas Sabonis from Basket News about how Jonas was, quote, close to or strongly considering, depending on which translation you read, some deal with the Greek EuroLeague club Panathinaikos. This raised some serious questions, so I'm just going to kind of go through the questions one by one and see what answers we've gotten in the past week. Johnny King, we're working on the super chat thing. We're definitely looking forward to being able to finally monetize. We'll talk about that on a later stream. European Shams is what Donatas is referred to, and he actually has been breaking a lot of relevant stories like to the Nuggets over the past like year or so. Like he was the one I think that told us last year that Dario was being pursued by, I think it was Real Madrid, or it was Olympiacos. Maybe both were interested in Dario last summer, which was maybe part of the reason why Calvin had to fly to Europe in person to try to get him. But it seems like, yeah, Donatas is the European Shams. All right. So first question that we had coming out of this situation was, did the Kings know that Val wanted to go back to Europe, and would it affect the Dario trade? The trade is supposed to be going through from all reports, like I said, including Mark Stein, who's one of the more trusted newsbreakers, although I am a bit irked that it hasn't been made official yet. I don't know why that's the case. There are a bunch of other transactions that have been, and this was one of the earlier reported things in free agency. It came on day 2, on that Tuesday of that moratorium period for free agency. And yeah, the Kings have already announced Dennis Schroeder being signed, and I thought that transaction was contingent on this trade because Sacramento has to get under the first apron. So I don't know, but it's supposed to be going through. Like, I have not heard anything to say that this is not going through. It's unclear whether the Kings knew or like completely had reason to know, because apparently I don't know if it was this club or another EuroLeague club, they had been sniffing around Jonas since last summer as well. Now, he wasn't a King last summer, right? He was a free agent. And I don't know what kind of offer was maybe on the table last year, but he ended up taking that 3-year deal from the Wizards, and then obviously gets traded to the Kings mid-season. So, and the Kings are kind of a mess. So I kind of, if somebody told me like, well, they should have had intel to know that this was a possibility, but they're a mess, like, and it happens to be the Kings, I would believe you. They could have known Poppin, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. It wouldn't make sense for the Kings to have known, honestly, because if they'd known that he just wanted to be bought out, and we're going to talk about it, but a lot of the reports are that he's willing to give up the rest of his contract, which, you know, makes sense for an off-season kind of buyout, and you have an offer from another club. It would have made sense for the Kings to just do that, wipe all of that money off their cap instead of having to trade for Dario at a lesser number and then worry about his money on the books. Mike Weisberg says, from all the reporting, Kings did not know. I think the most interesting thing here is that Excel, according to Stein, came out yesterday and said that Denver had not reached out about the guarantee of second year. Yeah, we're going to get to all of that, Mike. The next question for me was, did Denver know? Because obviously you're thinking, well, why would they have known? What reason would they have had to go through with this trade if they'd known that the backup center they got, wanted to leave? But part of the deal with Dario is we wanted to get off of that contract and clear a roster spot. So there was a possibility in my mind in the early days after this initial reporting, or early hours, I should say, because we got a lot in the meantime, that, okay, maybe Denver knew about this and they have a different plan for backup center, but they used the fact that they knew and the Kings didn't to get off of Dario's contract, clear a roster spot if Val was going to go, and then they were just going to, buy him out, but basically for nothing because he's willing to forfeit the rest of the money. That was a possibility, but it seems like Denver did not know, right? The other part of this is that Val's agent is Jeff Schwartz with Excel. who is also the agent for Jokic, Jamal, Reggie, Russ, DJ. So when I heard that, I was like, well, how could they have not known if his agent is like everyone else's agent, right? Excel has the closest. It might not be the case anymore because of some of the guys that have left, including like Russ and DJ. But there was an article that Tom Haberstroh did that had this stat in there that Excel Sports and the Denver Nuggets have the closest agency team relationship in terms of number of clients on the roster of any agency team relationship in the league, more so than even Clutch and the Lakers, more so than CAA and the Knicks. I think probably now we're just kind of on par with them because of some of the guys that have left. But when I saw that news, it surprised me because I was like, well, how could they have not known? But and the other part of this is that, you know, Jonas has two agents, both with Excel. Seems like Schwartz is kind of like the main Excel guy, and then probably every client has like another agent under that, you know, has time to deal with them. Michael Tellem is his other agent with Excel, and Michael Tellem is I keep wanting to call him Ben Wallace, Ben Tenzer's best friend from childhood. Actually, Bennett Durando from the Denver Post did a profile on Ben Tenzer last week, talking about the relationship with Michael Tellem, and got quotes from him about growing up with Ben and all that. And he said, quote, "Ben grew up in our house." Like, that's how close these guys are. So I was like, how could they have not known if, you know, his agents are like this close to our people, right? But as somebody else pointed out in the chat about the involvement of an international agent, George Zakas from SDNA reported on this just a couple of days ago about how Jonas's Lithuanian agent was basically the one that negotiated like this offer from Panathinaikos. So I'm quoting from the article here. Panathinaikos moved for Jonas after being assured by his Lithuanian agent that Denver would release him. The player wants to return to Europe, and his side gave the Greens, Pana, clear guarantees of an NBA exit. This was all not without talking to Denver, by the way, this Lithuanian agent, supposedly. But the Nuggets had not been properly informed, and their reaction reflected that. So let's get to Denver's reaction to all this, because for a few days we didn't know if they knew or not. Like, they knew ahead of time, but it was clear that they didn't. When I saw this other part of that same story from George Zakas, I was wondering who was it that had an interest in sort of putting this article out there and trying to de-escalate it, because it was clear somebody had an incentive to say, we didn't know. Someone from the Panathinaikos side, right? So here's another quote from that same article. Panathinaikos, as Europe's biggest basketball club, has never acted abruptly, not even with financially struggling Greek teams. It would be absurd to do so with a giant like Denver and a, quote, billionaire owner like Kroenke. So it seems like they respect, the billionaires respect each other over there, or they respect billionaires over there. Went on to say that Panathinaikos was shocked when they realized that Kroenke was not informed about the matter. Under these circumstances, it's not surprising the Nuggets became angry and took the Lithuanian agents handling as disrespect. Right? So let's get to Denver's actual reaction that actually prompted that article, which goes to the next question, which was, what could Denver do to get Jonas to stay? And the reason you ask this question, you know, on first glance, you're like, well, the guy's under contract. Why is this even like a question? But this is a players' league, player empowerment movement, all this stuff. You don't want your players to be unhappy, generally speaking, but especially not if they're your important players. the Nuggets even went so far as to trade Bones Highland in the middle of a season where they were trying to win the title because of locker room issues and all that, and perhaps took like less on that. I think they actually sent out seconds in that trade. I need to go back and look at that. But like they weren't getting like a commensurate return for the production that the player put on the court, that kind of thing. But you go that far because you're trying to keep everything copacetic in your locker room, and that's why it's so important to keep players happy, right? So what could Denver do to get him to say? Shams put out a report 2 days ago, I believe. Denver has informed Jonas Valanciunas' reps that the franchise fully intends to have him honor his contract as the Nuggets view Valanciunas as a critical center addition to back up Nikola Jokic and play alongside him, which I thought was an interesting little, not addition, but just wording there. It's clear Shams got this from from his agent or agents, right? This is Jonas's agents telling Shams, Denver values him. At first, I thought this was something that like the front office had put out to sort of like make the statement that like, no, like our plan is to keep this guy, whether it is or not, and we'll get to what that could look like, and sort of project like strength and control over the situation. But then I realized that like that's not really, Shams's game. Not that he doesn't have front office connections, but especially with the wording of this and everything else that Shams has done over the last few weeks in terms of putting stuff out there, it seemed very clear that this was agent language, especially the part about viewing Jonas as a critical center addition to back up Nikola and play alongside him. Plus, it said that Denver has informed his reps. So that's what it felt like. It was coming from his agents or his people, right? Let's see. I'm going to take a brief break here, see if we have any questions about any of this from the chat here. Let's see. Wonder if Panathinaikos is trying to work out a Greek connection with Denver. I don't think that's what they're doing, Hurricane. I think they're trying to do some damage control because it seems like they were fed some bad information from the Lithuanian agent. Poppin', I get you saying one agent caused this, and I'm kind of there, but at the same time, I don't think Jonas is like completely absolved here, because he has to know, like his agent has to be telling him like, I'm communicating with the teams, especially because some of the initial reports about this were he was initially excited about the trade to Denver, or like happy about it. I forget which word they used. Probably happy to just not be a king anymore, and just be on a real, competitive team. But that he at some point changed his mind and wanted to go back to Europe. He has to know at least that whether he's directly involved in the communication or not, he has to know that communication is happening, especially if he's only going through the one agent that doesn't deal with any of his NBA business. So yeah, it's a sticky situation. Yeah, true. Cronky, Greek. Let's see. Yes, don't worry, Hurricane. We're getting to the mailbag, and I'm ready to answer every question. All right, let's keep going here with the Jonas situation. So Valančiūnas actually spoke briefly at some panel on, I think, sports in Lithuania. I think this was just yesterday. And he basically said, like, not much. He was kind of cryptic about like, oh, this whole thing has kind of blown up, and like everybody has, had their own thoughts and opinions on the matter, and blah, blah, blah. And we'll see in time. And again, the trade is not final yet, so I don't blame anybody for being very vague in the direct statements that they're putting out. But he also said, at some point they're making a plan to travel to Denver once the trade is complete. I have questions about the timing of that, because Jonas is set to play in Eurobasket starting in August, but their training camp is going to start even sooner than that. So Need that trade to go through soon so that we can get this sorted out. Yeah, good point, Hurricane. I wonder if the Cronkies know the Panathinaikos ownership. I can't imagine there's that many Greek billionaires, multi-hundred billionaires, etc. That's true. And look, I don't know any billionaires personally, right? I only know billionaires from movies. And billionaires in movies are always trying to one-up each other. So it also wouldn't surprise me if it's like, oh, we have no idea that they hadn't talked to you, because it turns into like a bad, story for them when Denver doesn't immediately fold and just buy him out. But it's a bad look to just like between franchises community, and maybe that applies to the EuroLeague as well. And that's kind of what that article from George Zakas was trying to get at. Okay. So they want to try to get this resolved before Jonas leaves for Eurobasket training camp. Question: should Jokic make a call? I think so. There was some random Reddit post that says that claims to be an article quoting a person that's close to Jokic that says that this has happened already. I have not been able to find the article. I don't know if it's happened. If it hasn't, I think it should. I think it'd be helpful. I think it's useful when the best player in the world calls you and is like, yo, bro, we need you. And like makes the player feel wanted and important and all that fuzzy stuff. The next question, after thinking about like how could they get Jonas to stay, and they do have him under contract. I think that's important to note. That's why this is even a question. What could and should Denver do if they can't get him to play for the Nuggets? Agree to play for the Nuggets, to be clear, because they do have him under contract. He can't play for anyone else. Yeah, the Tim Hardaway signing became official like right before I started the show, so I was glad I saw that. That's good. Why are my glasses so foggy? Are they foggy? They feel clear to me. It might just be the way the light's hitting them right now for you guys. Thank you, GP of St. John, for worrying about my vision, though. I appreciate it. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so what should Denver do if they can't get Jonas to play for the Nuggets? Option 1, and this is one that a lot of people have pointed out, that they could pivot to begging Al Horford to take the gig, as he's really the only big left in free agency worth pursuing to that degree. And the reason I say that is just because the free agent big class that's left isn't really great anymore. If we buy Jonas out, he forfeits all the money, and then Denver gets rid of the entire $10 million cap hit from his contract. That would open up the full $14.1 million mid-level exception to use on Al, or Al and a combination of another player. Like, you can use the mid-level on multiple players if you want. Like, they all have to fit within that exception. But you don't have to give Al the full $14 million. Good choice. I mean, can't be any worse than our backup center situation over the last few years. All respect to DeAndre Jordan, by the way, actually. Option 2, they could try to find somebody on the buyout market. Nikola Vucevic with the Bulls has been rumored to be a potential buyout candidate because he's somebody on an expiring contract. If Chicago does decide to buy him out, Denver could sign him for anything, up to that $14.1 million mid-level. I don't think that he's worth quite that, but I'm sure that they could work something out. I think his current contract is $20 million. So if the Bulls bought him out now, could be something like the Bulls buy him out for $14 million and then he gets like $6 million or so of our mid-level. Vooch is Jokic's like longtime friend. They're Counter-Strike buddies, I believe. And Jokic always has a fun time cooking him, similar to what he does to Val, although I am not aware of any reports that they are as close of friends. So that is another option. Option 3 is looking to the trade market. Now, Cody makes a good point. Keeping Jonas is the best option. I don't think Orlando will give up Goga, and I don't think Al has much interest in Denver. I don't think Al has much interest in Denver either, but I could be wrong, right? I was trying to process through some of my own internalized, trauma from being told for years that free agents don't want to come to Denver, and that's why they've had to give out all these ridiculous player options over the last few years. And now Al, I do think that Al is more interested in Golden State or retirement, but maybe part of the reason that he hasn't made a decision yet is that he's waiting to see what the situation is going to be in Denver. I just can't imagine that Denver didn't pursue him hard early, because we know that they were interested at first and then they pivoted to Jonas. But maybe they just don't. I was having a conversation with I think it's L Luggett on Twitter just this morning, and I'm like, maybe they just don't value Al as much because of the age or whatever, and they haven't, gone at him like hard. And maybe if we gave him the hard sell, plus obviously we can pay him more money than anybody, but especially Golden State at this point, depending on what they do with the Kuminga situation. But going back to option 3 here, if they aren't able to keep Jonas, is looking to the trade market. They could use the mid-level exception as a trade exception, that $14.1 million, to effectively trade a player into cap space. The other option within looking to the trade market would be to just trade Jonas as basically a $10 million trade exception and then let the other team buy him out. The order of operations only matters for, is Denver going to be like hard capped or not? There's like some cap mechanics with that, but effectively you're looking to the trade market. You're looking to find a player on a team that is looking to shed salary. My favorite target, and it's highly unlikely because this is actually a really good player, is Goga Bitadze. He's really good defensive player. They don't use him a lot as this, but he's got some passing chops as like a DHO hub and that kind of thing. But Orlando, why would Orlando do this, right? So why am I even suggesting it if he's such a good player? They don't really use him. He's their third string center. Even in the playoffs, he was a DNP most nights, even with their backup center, Mo Wagner, not really backup center and backup big, kind of, out with the ACL. Even in the regular season, he's basically used about as much as Zeke, despite being a much better player. And Orlando is currently above the luxury tax by just a little bit. Right now, they could get under the luxury tax in a less painful way than giving up Goga, but maybe you could convince them to, to just do this. I don't know how Denver would sweeten the deal because they don't have any second round picks left. I wouldn't want to trade one of our good young players for him, but. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you could work out a deal with Orlando. The thing is, they're a relatively competent front office, despite my lamentations, I should say, over their getting a point guard so late. Oh, wow. Bradley Beal signing with Denver. But that is a potential option. Let's see here. Okay, so we have our first mailbag question. I kind of sprinkled them throughout if they were relevant to the point. So I want to drive this point home. Whoop. Mile High Pete submitted this mailbag question. It says, just to clarify where we stand, Val wants to go to Europe. Nuggets expect him to report. We're at a stalemate. The ball is essentially in Val's court, sort of, do I suck it up and play or give the money back? Do I have that correct? So, loved that question from Pete. Whoop. And not quite, because he's already willing to give the money back. So this is where the situation is a little bit different than it was with Sasha Vezenkov last year, I believe, is when he got traded from the Kings to another person who was sick of playing for the Kings, so they wanted to go back to Europe. traded from the Kings to Toronto, and then Toronto like bought him out, but he basically forfeited the rest of his contract to be able to go back to Europe. But the difference is Toronto didn't need him, or like they weren't like desperate for his services. Denver is desperate for Val's services. They need a good backup center. Jokic is now 30. He can't be playing 36 minutes a night anymore. And I've been surprised, honestly, at how many people have just kind of said, like, I'm sick of this situation, just let Val go. Because, like, beggars can't be choosers. And when it comes to backup center, like, Denver is a beggar right now. And they're not actually, because they do have this guy under contract. Like, they have the hard leverage in this situation. And from all reports, Val is a consummate professional. He's not going to, like, kick up a stink that's going to affect the locker room. Like, it may not engender the, goodwill between him and, like, the front office. But, like, this is a bench player. Denver needs to be willing to play more hardball. And so I just wanted to give my sort of my final verdict on what Denver is doing right now in playing hardball and saying, like, we want you to report, like, we are going to hold you to your contract. I've seen a lot of people say you can't bring in somebody who doesn't want to be here because it would mess up the vibes, to not have everyone rowing in the same direction, especially for a team going for the title. And they want people to love coming to work every day and all of that. It's like, a job's a job, right? And as long as you've got guys that are acting like professionals, that's the main thing. Now, if it gets to a point where he's not acting like a professional anymore, that's a different story. Just letting him go, like buying him out and like whatever, clearing the cap hit entirely. It puts Denver in a tough spot, right? They don't want to now. The only like good free agent left is Al Horford, and the trade market depends on other teams being willing to deal with you for relatively few assets at this point, right? So you don't want to just let him go and put yourself in a situation where you're getting over leveraged by Al Horford's agents or other teams that are trying to work with you in a trade to come up with an alternative solution, while you're trying to come up with a backup plan, perhaps, right? So in my ideal world, Denver would have convinced Orlando to salary dump Goga, and that's probably not going to happen for the reasons that we said. Orlando's just a competent front office. But let's see. Like I said, I already talked about the buyout options, but Denver should try, like, at least project that they're trying to keep Valančiūnas in the meantime and say, like, look, if none of this stuff works, like, we're going to be fine. Like, we're not going to be over leveraged in these other deals, like trying to find an alternative to this situation when maybe the best outcome is just Val honors his deal. Woo. I actually think that Denver still needs to make a move, by the way, Val or not. Before any of this news came out, I thought they needed to shore up their forward depth, and I think adding Chris Boucher to the roster somehow would be helpful. I mean, would he sign a vet minimum to come off of Denver's bench? He'd probably be like an almost every night guy, honestly, just because like his competition right now are rookie Deron Holmes coming off an Achilles and Zeke Naji. All right, well, that's the Val news. Want to talk a little bit about the NBA Cup groups. Let me bring that up. So Denver got bumped into West Group C, which includes the Nuggets, the Rockets, the Warriors, the Spurs, and the Blazers. For the next mailbag question here from She Loved Tommy. Thank you for submitting the mailbag questions ahead of time, by the way. Makes show planning so much easier. Is NBA Cup. LeBron, then Giannis. Somehow I feel it's only right that Jokic finds a way to get his hands on that cup. thoughts on our pool and how we match up, mostly with the Rockets and some with the Spurs. So great question, Sheila Tommy. And this actually blends into what's going to be our final segment of the day, which is just how big the West has gotten in totality. But in terms of how we match up, I don't really think that when you're talking about a one-off games in NBA Cup group play that it's about matchups, or at least player matchups. I think it's more about the matchup of who cares in November. And I fear that Denver does not match up well with any team in that regard, which is why they have underperformed in NBA Cup group play the last couple of years. So I think the try-hard teams, like the Rockets, have a real edge in this group. The Rockets and the Blazers, actually, who are trying to be good next year, but they might end up not as good as maybe some people think. So I frankly, I just expect the Rockets to come out of this group. I think they're going to be really, really good next year, and they're a really good defensive team. Really good defensive teams win a lot of regular season games. Especially if they're ready to like pick up guys from 70 feet in October, which actually, as you can see from this poster here, the tournament tips off in October. So it's not great. We can take a quick look at some of the other NBA Cup groups here. Give me just a second to compare. I know people said that Denver got the group of death, and I'm like, honestly, I wouldn't be worried about the Blazers, Spurs, and Warriors if we didn't have the Rockets in the group. Honestly, there are easier groups, basically every group in the East. And then, like, West A is not a great group, but it's weird because you've got the the Thunder and the Wolves, who are, like, I don't want to play those teams in October. And then you have three teams that you absolutely want to play at any time of the year in the Suns, the Jazz, and the Kings. So it's kind of a very like bimodal, like lopsided kind of group. And then West B is more kind of all middle of the pack teams. Probably the worst one there is the Pelicans. And then honestly, outside of that, they're all like very mid. Like you could see every team in West B as a potential play-in team, except maybe the Clippers, just because they are like a more serious like defensive team that has enough creation, unlike the Mavs. We're going to talk about Dorian Finney-Smith in the last segment. Yeah, the care factor is really it. It's like we don't match up well because we're not going to care. But we're going to talk about the size matchups and all that in our last segment. What a great chat today, guys. All right, let's see here. We are going to move on to the main meat of today's show. Only took like 40 minutes. Good job. I don't know how long I expected to spend on that segment, guys. Anyway, just another reminder to like and subscribe before we move on here. Let's see. Today's show. All right, let's go on to some of my deeper thoughts on Denver's offseason so far. We did talk a little bit about last week. We graded the moves and sort of initial reactions, initial grades to the moves in terms of grading them on a transaction basis. Like, what does this mean for how we managed these assets and kind of, you know, broader view on how positive each move was going to be for the team. So let's see. I already said that it was a little weird that the Jonas and Dario trade hasn't been made official yet. The trade is not contingent on a buyout, so I just don't know why it's taking this long. I do think it's important that that trade goes through. We cannot take Dario back. Like that would be like the worst case scenario in all of this. Like Denver has options right now, even if Jonas like really, really like is going to kick up a stink about how he doesn't want to stay. But if the trade doesn't go through, they're not in a good place when it comes to trying to solve the backup big situation. My thought, honestly, right now, in terms of why it's taking so long, is that Denver actually might be looking at a way to reroute Jonas to a third team that would just buy him out, and that team would give us something. It might not be Orlando. It might not be any of the teams that we talked about, but that could be what's happening. Let's see. I already talked about Goga. So that's kind of those are all my thoughts on the Jonas situation already. I think I've talked that one to death for now until we actually get some kind of update or resolution. Right now, everything that people are saying is speculation until we get some actual information from the team, but we can't until the trade is made official. So that's the other reason that would be nice if they could make the trade official. Question. Is there a relationship between the MPJ trade and Christian Braun's upcoming extension? So, first of all, like on the financial level, it's obviously yes, right? Getting off of MPJ's money, or at least in terms of the difference between him and Cam, that's another $17 million in terms of cap room under the second apron, which Josh is effectively treating as a hard cap, as we've talked about on previous shows. Financially, if they'd kept MPJ, they would have been scraping up against the second apron, even if they'd gotten Christian on a team-friendly deal. Now, they could have stayed under, but they still would have been, like, scraping right up against it. I did some of the math, and it actually would have been possible with the cap, with the more generous cap projections, I should say, to stay under the second apron, keep MPJ and pay Christian, as long as it was a team-friendly deal. But it would have required finding a new home for Zeke and or not extending Peyton at all. And I think you would have had to do both, because Peyton's going to probably get paid more than Zeke, and math. But as I alluded to just now, it was going to potentially get more difficult if the cap projections that Bobby Marks reported last week, 7% increase in the cap as opposed to 10% increase, had held. And on top of that, Denver still would have been way more hamstrung in terms of their flexibility to build out the rest of their roster. Even ignoring the financial constraints, though, the roster fit between Christian and MPJ was starting to become tenuous. On paper, Christian and MPJ should be relatively complementary wings, right? Christian brings, at least on paper, defense, cutting, transition play, and Mike's a shooter, right? Gives you that perimeter element. And both of them are excellent rebounders for their position. Now, this is counting MPJ as a 3, not a 4. He's not a great rebounder for a 4, but he's an excellent rebounder for a 3. Undeniably. And I actually think that they're going to miss that a bit with Cam, which is why I'm so worried about our front court situation. Unfortunately, though, both lack a pretty crucial ability on the wing in terms of even, like, baseline, tertiary, honestly, on ball creation. Like, you can give this guy the ball and, like, he can run, like, a basic pick and roll, or he can beat his guy off the dribble and, like, get into the paint and kick out. Like, that's not something that really either of them do on a consistent basis. And friend of the show, CT Fazio, brought this up on our post-draft show, right? When you're building a roster around Jokic, who is not a primary on-ball guy, you need more on-ball creation, especially come playoff time. Like, you can get through a regular season with just Jokic not being hounded as much as he was in the playoffs, operating strictly as that hub, operating strictly out of pick and roll with Jamal Murray. But eventually you start being triple teamed in the post, and you need some guys to make some secondary reads, and we just didn't have that on a consistent level, to the point where you were more dependent on three-point shooting as a team that doesn't want to be dependent on three-point shooting, because you lack that secondary on-ball creation. Cam being a player that could do a little bit more as that tertiary or in some cases secondary, maybe in like a second unit creator, or like a secondary on-ball initiator from that wing spot, kind of turns the temperature down a bit on Christian. Because I think everybody had gotten to the point where we're like, we're not really expecting that to happen from Mike. We just need him to make shots. But a lot of people were like hoping and praying that Christian could develop a little bit more. Not a lot, just a little bit more. Especially in terms of consistency from his off the dribble game. Now, he doesn't need to do that quite as much because we've got somebody else that can do that from the wing position. And Christian can just focus on the things that he does well on the floor. Now, that's not to say that Christian won't grow in his game. He absolutely can. And he probably will. Because he's a young player who works really hard. Who's got the backing of his teammates and his coaches and all of that. Like, I made this joke. He was sitting with Adelman at one of the summer league practices today. He's a teacher's pet. I know what that's like. Like you get full support when you are showing up there every day, right? And it also takes some pressure off of Peyton, who we're actually going to talk about in a little bit in the next section here. Let's take a quick break from this to check out the chat here. Denver's got many options now. Yeah, I think that the versatility that Cam brings is going to outweigh maybe some of the stuff that Denver might lose from having a player that has this sort of ceiling of MPJ. I think the team's ceiling is going to be higher because of Cam's versatility, more so than like the ceiling of any one player, if that makes sense. Just having someone that you trust to make those secondary passing reads alone is going to be really big. Okay, GP of St. John, I'll answer this. I think Al would be a better fit for Denver than Valančiūnas. I think that there are arguments for both. I genuinely worry about Denver's front court size, especially in this Western Conference. I'll talk about that when we get to our exploration of the Giant West. But Jonas is probably not going to play come playoff time or play much come playoff time because of the defense, frankly. But, you know, shoot, the Rockets went super double big with Steven Adams, and I mean, Steven Adams is a much better defender than Jonas, but with Steven Adams and Şengün, and you could envision like, okay, Adelman's going to be the one to make the double big with Jokic work because they'll figure out some kind of crazy zone that allows them to defend in that look, and then they just bludgeon teams with their size. You know, and that maybe is what Shams was told when he said that Jonas was going to be critical playing quote unquote alongside Jokic. But Al Horford just brings the versatility like up. You don't have to change anything for the versatility to be added if you add Al Horford, right? He could play 4, he could play small ball 5, he can shoot sometimes, like he can hit a standstill catch and shoot 3 occasionally. You're not going to rely on him on volume, but in a pinch he could be there. And then the defense is absolutely there. Some of the defensive sequences from this guy in his age 39 season were just spectacular, frankly. Better than some players on the Nuggets had all year. You said much, much younger players than the Nuggets had all year. So I do think, though, that you might want an actual true big next to guys like Zeke and a guy like Duran, who's, again, coming off an Achilles and is already an undersized rookie big. So I see arguments for both. Okay. Yeah, surely there's a matchup, and maybe there is now with the West kind of transforming the way that it is. All right, let's talk about the other moves from Denver here. So on the roles of Bruce and Tim Hardaway Jr., whose signings have been confirmed both yesterday and today in the case of Tim, Denver is in an interesting place, trying to balance veteran competition and egos with trying to get runway for all of this internal development. And I had a little had a little graphic for this here. Where is it at? Internal development. Right? This was the buzzword going into the offseason from Josh, from Adelman, from John Wallace, and Ben Tenzer. We're just going to call them Ben Wallace from now on, and maybe even when I'm referring to one of them, I'll just call them Ben Wallace, because they make decisions together, because they're collaborative. But they talked a whole big game about internal development, how important it's going to be. And then two of your most important young players off the bench, Peyton and Julian, effectively get their minutes cut in like the first 28 hours of free agency, let's say, when the Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown signings were made official. Friend of the show, Sports Shorts, actually made a really good point the other day. Basically said, hey, these veteran additions actually take a lot of pressure off of the youth to be high-level contributors. I don't even want to say right away, because right now, like, Peyton is entering his 4th season. Julian's entering his 3rd season now. But at least in terms of, like, taking pressure off of them in the team context. There's still obviously pressure when it comes to growing their individual careers. Let's see. Because they're trying to get their contract extensions. Peyton is contract or extension eligible this summer, and he might go to restricted free agency next year. Julian is going to be extension eligible next summer. So this is a really big year for both of them. I agree, Poppin. Like, they will have to take those minutes. You have to, compete. Under Calvin's mechanism, it was basically sink or swim for the team with these guys, with Julian and Peyton, because it's like you got to make these guys work or you don't have playable dudes, right? Hello, Tony B. Val, did you see, you just saw reports? I'll do like a quick refresh on the timeline here. I don't see anything new on the Val situation. Just waiting for the... Oh, Marvin Bagley is off the table, by the way, as a backup center option. So that kind of sucks, because it just sucks when options are taken off the table. Now, like, Denver just kind of has to make Valančiūnas work unless they can figure out some other trade. But I don't see anything about the trade being made official yet for Valančiūnas. We will talk about the MPJ vid in the mailbag segment, T-Cart. All right. So, right, back to the youth here. Under Calvin's mechanism, sink or swim for the team. Now, their positive development of Julian and Peyton becomes just a nice bonus for Denver, right? It's not a necessary condition to Denver being a title caliber team, whereas last year it absolutely was. Going into the year last year, there were specific deficits on this roster that it was clear Calvin said, Peyton, Julian, they're going to have to be the ones to fill this deficit. And even Christian had some things he needed to work on in his game. He still does, but as we just talked about with the on-ball creation kind of side of things, he has less pressure on him to do that now that we have Cam. We needed, like I said, secondary on-ball creation. We needed to come from one of those guys, which is insane when you think about it, just based on the way that our roster was constructed. But yeah, now there's less pressure on the team to like make those guys work out. And I wonder how that's going to work out with the dynamic of them, kind of being in contract years. But I want to talk about Peyton Watson's role specifically. And even more the defense. I think Denver's additions this offseason have almost been all offensive. Jonas, Tim Hardaway Jr., the MPJ to Cam move, I think, is lateral when it comes to defense, especially because of the rebounding gap there. Bruce is a good defender sometimes, especially in the regular season. I don't see him as a consistent impact defender. He's just going to be like solid, right? Especially if he's lost a step. Though I do think that the team's kind of collective defensive IQ has gone up because you have fewer minutes collectively of Peyton and Julian. You have fewer minutes of MPJ. You have more minutes of Cam, more minutes of Bruce. Tim Hardaway Jr., I'm not sure about the defensive IQ. I haven't seen like bad things when it comes to defensive IQ, but I've seen just like he's sort of lacking in some of the physical traits as well to be a good defender, but we need him to make shots. Peyton's extension is also a big point of contention this offseason, right? He's going to have way more competition on the wing. Like we talked about Bruce and Tim Hardaway Jr., but also Cam and Julian, right? I think, like, frankly, for Peyton's sake, he could be more useful and get more minutes on, like, guarantee more minutes on the team if he were able to take on some level of competent forward play. That's like, especially the rebounding bit is important for that. But, you know, that's not really his game, right? He prefers to play on the wing. He said last year that he was preferring to play that small forward role when he had those opportunities, although offensively you're like, why though? But because of all the veteran wings that we added, he may actually long for the days when his only competition at his position was Zeke Naji, right, at that forward spot. Peyton needs to raise his floor, and I mean defensively. A lot of people talk about the offense, but in the playoffs especially, his lack of mastery of defensive fundamentals, both on and off ball, were just detrimental to the team. And I'm only talking about the defensive end of the floor in this bit, right? This is even before you get into like a philosophical argument of like, well, would it be even more helpful to have just a more consistent offensive player there? Because just getting a good shot down the floor or making a shot allows the whole team to set their defense and not have to play in transition as much. That's before you even get there, right? Because that would be a critique on his offense, which opens up a whole other can of worms. But I really do think that Peyton's defensive consistency is still the thing that is like the most disappointing for a player in his position. When you draft a 19-year-old who came off the bench and averaged 3 points per game, you already know you're taking on a project, right? Especially offensively, right? Because you kind of know you draft him for his defensive tools. But I think the more disappointing thing is how inconsistent he still is defensively and how we're still just talking about his theoretical ceiling, right? I think I'm kind of at the point where I don't think the consistency is going to come from improved motor, because I don't think that motor can be taught, right? I think that Peyton's got to improve his defensive consistency through improving the fundamentals. On ball, off ball, knowing the scout, not getting blown by, knowing when to play passing lanes, knowing when to gamble so that it's not as big of a risk to the rest of the team defensively. Right? Ultimately, defense is the thing that Peyton theoretically brings to a level that nobody else on the roster can. So if he can't get to that level defensively consistently, it doesn't really make sense to have him on the team, because offensively, I'm like, we could get that from somebody else, right? You need the defensive consistency to be there for it to make sense, right? And then on Julian, everything I said about Peyton goes for him too. And honestly, for him, it may be even more difficult for him to crack the rotation, just because it's everything I said about Peyton, but it's on the offensive side. Because I'm like, he needs to grow defensively, all this stuff, improve his defensive floor. But he was drafted for his offense, right? He's drafted to be a shooter, drafted to be this DHO player, drafted to be efficient. We can get shooting, spacing, and like par or like mediocre offensive contribution from the other guys on this roster, especially Tim Hardaway Jr. and even Bruce Brown, more inconsistently though. But I think for this, for Julian this year, it's gonna be hard for him, because he's gonna have to be better than better than the vets offensively in order to get minutes over them because they're vets, right? That's just how it works. You know what you're getting from the vets night to night, more or less. If you don't know what you're getting from Julian, you're a team that's trying to grow. I think Adelman's been pretty consistent in this, actually. A lot of people have said, like, Adelman's going to be way more flexible than Malone. He's going to play the young guys more, this, that, and the other. And I'm listening to the words coming out of his mouth in these various interviews and the introductory press conference and all of that. He's like, yeah, development's important, but guys are going to have to earn their spot, right? He doesn't really sound any different than Malone in that sense. And, like, I dig it, frankly, because I think these guys need to actually earn their positions. Let's see here. So that's it on Peyton and Julian. Lucky for Julian, he isn't yet extension eligible. He will be next summer, but they don't have to extend him next summer. They could wait, kind of take him to restricted free agency. That gets, into a whole other can of worms. Let's see. Poppin'. Who do you want to be parked in the corner? Peyton? I don't know if I want Peyton parked in a corner because nobody's paying attention to him there anyway. I need Peyton to, like, make his layups. Like, I care about Peyton making his layups more than I care about him making his threes. Because I don't think he's going to be guarded from three anyway. I care about him taking those shots when they're open. And yeah, making a few would be nice. But, like, the rim finishing, like, needs to be a lot better. It's not even just for someone at his position. It's just, like, kind of bad for an NBA player right now. He had, like, a really hot stretch to start the season. He was shooting, like, 80% at the rim or something. And then that disappeared really fast. And it was, like, 51%, I think, in the second, like, post All-Star break. And then in the playoffs, like, we saw what happened there. Okay. So that was all I had to say on the Denver Nuggets off season for now. In terms of deeper thoughts, going through the chat now to see if we have any other questions about Denver's moves before I moved on to the rest of the West. Let's see. I know it's difficult. Would I rather watch Peyton Watson take an open corner three or a transition layup? I don't know. And that's a problem. Right? That's a problem. GP of St. John, his future could be incredibly bright, but, like, the future is now also, right? Especially for somebody that is extension eligible that's, playing on a team that has title aspirations. Okay. Sweet. So that's all I had to say on Denver's off season. Please remember to like and subscribe as we move on to our next section here. So I wanted to give my thoughts on some of the other teams' moves, and I was wondering, like, what angle do I want to take with this, because there's, like, a billion transactions. I can't cover everything, not in any depth, right? There's no deadline because Jonas is it's going to be a trade that could happen at any time. But it should happen soon. Like, all the reports are that it's still going through. Like, I haven't seen anything to the contrary, so I wouldn't worry about that. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I want to talk about other teams' moves. And the thing that got me finally, I talk about how big the Northwest Division was getting, and now it seems like it's the entire Western Conference. And I say the Western Conference and not the league because it's like the West is just siphoning off centers from the East. Centers and power forwards are just being pulled over to the Western Conference. Not to the Nuggets, though, except, I guess ultimately we get Jonas, and we get him ultimately from the Wizards who signed him last year. Let's see here. All right. So the West is huge. All right. We are actually going to count, without numbers, because I am not actually going to count them, the centers in the West. Because I think it's worth spelling out just how big this conference has gotten for the conference that sort of perfected small ball. in teams like the Golden State Warriors, in teams like the mid-2010s OKC Thunder. And we're going to ask if small ball is just dead, right? First team here I've got is the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? They were the first ones to do it. They built out their twin towers with Rudy and Cat, who is now Julius Randle, who's not quite a 7-footer, but they still have Nas coming off the bench. And I thought Nas was going to be starting, but they ended up re-signing Julius, so they're paying their six-man $25 million in Nas Reed. Him being out in 2023 was actually huge for that matchup with Denver, because we were doing really well in those bench minutes, those minutes without Rudy. In 2024, it was a lot more. It was actually still about the Rudy minutes, to be honest, because Denver was winning the bench minutes in 2024, the non-Jokic minutes. We were winning those when Rudy was also off the floor. Once the Wolves started playing Rudy against their bench, it was a real problem for us. So curse you, Chris Finch, for figuring that out. The Utah Jazz never got small after they traded Rudy to the Timberwolves, right? They have Kessler. They got Markkanen. They just traded John Collins, but they had him as well. And now they have Filipowski. And, oh, yeah, they traded Colin Sexton for Yusuf Nurkic on purpose. So that was a choice. Portland's front court got unbelievably crowded last year, right? They had Robert Williams III, Donovan Clingan, Joab Reith, DeAndre Ayton, and not to mention Moses Brown, who Moses Brown was with them this past season, but he's not anymore. I think he just got signed with another team. I forget who. And then this summer, they decided to buy out DeAndre Ayton to make room for Hansen Yang, who they perhaps drafted a little too high, but, interesting choice. And then last summer, OKC added Isaiah Hartenstein, and they played double big for large stretches of the season once Chet was back from his hip injury, right? So all the teams I just listed, that's just every team in the Northwest Division. And I think pretty definitively Denver has the smallest, aggregate front court of any team in the Northwest Division, which if you told somebody that in 2023, after they'd won the title, being one of the biggest teams in the league, they wouldn't believe you. Except for the Timberwolves, because they were always going to be big just based on their roster. So I thought it was isolated to the Northwest Division. I was like, well, teams are loading up to play Jokic, and these teams have to play Jokic 4 times a year, this, that, and the other. But it's just, that's a little bit of cope. It's not the whole trend can't just be about one player, especially when you're talking about teams like the Jazz that are they're not worried about competing during Jokic's competitive window, right? I don't think that team is necessarily going to make the playoffs before Jokic retires, if I'm being completely honest with you. But then the Southwest Division decided to join the party. Dallas decided to replenish their front court in 23-24, right? They started with Lively, drafting Derek Lively in 2023. And then they traded for Daniel Gafford at the trade deadline, and they also upgraded their 4 spot with PJ Washington. I don't want to give Nico Harrison too much credit here, though, because he was the one that signed Grant Williams first. He signed him that offseason and was able to trade him for PJ at the deadline because he gave up a maybe pretty valuable first-round pick now that we're looking at it after the Luka trade. And before he went after PJ Washington that deadline, he was trying to go after Kyle Kuzma. Can you imagine what would have happened to the Dallas Mavericks at the end of 2024 if they'd gotten Kyle Kuzma at the deadline instead of PJ Washington? That's just an alternate universe. And they basically got saved because Kyle Kuzma was like, I don't want to go. I want a team that's more on my timeline or whatever. Kuzma. I don't know. But then Dallas went even further, as we all know now, when they traded Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis. And now they also have Cooper Flag. So they have just like a million power forwards on that roster because they also have the small ball 4s in Najee Marshall and Caleb Martin. But then they have their bigs as well in, I consider AD to be a 5, even though he's not good at it. He's probably better at it than he is at being a 4, like defensively. Just because, and like offensively, like he can't shoot anymore. It's a problem. But they have a billion 4s, and then they've got like 3 centers. It's a very crowded front court in Dallas, to the point where I'm like, can we just have one of those? Like, just give us, we'll take Lively. The Rockets tried stocking up in 2023 because they were courting Brook Lopez in free agency that year. Part of that, though, might have been more due to a lack of confidence in what Şengün was going to become. Obviously, he proved them wrong that next year and then earned not a max extent. Like, I don't know what Raphael Stone is like putting in the water of these kids to take these extensions, but he's getting great deals on these young players. This past season, the Rockets successfully deployed Şengün and Steven Adams double big lineups in the playoffs. They were plus 21 net against the Golden State Warriors in those minutes. And I actually think they probably win that series in retrospect against Golden State, if not for Ime distrusting those looks early in the series. Like, I think it was game 4 when Golden State goes up 3-1, and they end up, I think, coming back and then pulling ahead in that game. It's basically they were getting destroyed in all the minutes that weren't double big. They were like the only lineups that worked against the Warriors. But Ime didn't trust them for a bit, went away from them at the end of the game because the Warriors started playing Hack Adams, and then the Rockets fell apart from there once Adams was sent to the bench. And then this offseason, the Rockets became massive. They have a projected starting front court of Jabari Smith Jr. at small forward, KD at power forward, Şengün at center. And then on the bench, they extended Steven Adams and signed Clint Capella and signed Dorian Finney-Smith and kept Jae'Sean Tate. These are all like viable come off the bench guys, and all of them are 4s and 5s. And even Dorian Finney-Smith is like a small ball 5, right? Basically. And I cannot reiterate to you how dumb it is, in my opinion, that Jae'Sean Tate decided to go back to Houston on a minimum in a situation where he will literally never play because of all the guys ahead of him in that front court, right? Like, I would be surprised if he got a single non-garbage time minute next season. And it's not like, oh, like he's older, he's been with that franchise forever, and he just wants to stay close to home. And I'm sure he does want to stay close to home. But this dude is only 29 years old. I just am shocked that he wouldn't want to try to maximize his earnings by, even if he's going to take a minimum, go take it somewhere where you're going to get playing time so you can earn more money. You can like play well and earn more money next year, right? But I digress. The Memphis Grizzlies, another Southwest Division team, they've always liked to play a bit bigger, right? They had Steven Adams themselves, and they like to play him with Jared Jackson Jr. and Brandon Clark coming off the bench. And I think right now they're hoping that Zach Edey can sort of approximate and eventually be an upgrade on Steven Adams, right? And Edey's had he had a pretty good rookie year, in my opinion. Like, hey, you're a rookie center. Like, that's a tough place to be in the NBA. Probably the second toughest gig as a rookie after being a rookie point guard. Just because you're dealing with like a massive increase in the physicality of your competition, the size and physicality of your competition going from college to the NBA. Trying to stay healthy, playing way more minutes. Like, it's just a bigger, I think, gap in the strain of their bodies when they're bigs, because bigs just burn more calories and their joints are weird. They're under way more pressure. So good rookie campaign from Zach Edey. They did end up trading away Jay Huff to the Indiana Pacers, but then they immediately signed Chuck Landale. They won't risk being centerless for a span with Edie sort of set to miss some time from, I think it's ankle surgery that he had from a summer workout injury that he got. Then we get to the Spurs, who just signed Luke Kornet to a 4-year, $40 million deal. Now, I want to be clear about that. It's not actually a 4-year deal because I think it's only like the first year guaranteed, and then the second year is like partially guaranteed, and then non-guarantee, and then a team option the last year. So it's not really a 4-year deal. But theoretically, if the Spurs decide to just keep rolling him over, this guy could make $40 million over the life of this contract. And that's just way more. Even in my wildest dreams, I couldn't imagine Luke Kornet getting a deal like that. And then on top of that, the deal that sort of sparked the idea for this segment in the first place, the Spurs traded Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley for Kelly Olynyk from the Wizards. Now, maybe they just didn't want to pay those young players, but it's awfully convenient, given the trend around the conference, that they ended up trading those two young wings for a power forward. Let's see here. All right, I'll just go through the Pacific Division, and then I'd love to get the chat's thoughts on how big the conference has gotten. So the Pacific Division is an interesting thing in all of this, because the Pacific Division is basically the place where it's like the Kings, and then all the teams where the old stars go to retire. Clippers, Kings, Warriors, or not Kings, Clippers, Warriors, Suns, Lakers, right? And then the Kings are just hanging out in the Pacific Division. They're just there, right? The Suns just traded 2 first-round picks, including their only, for themselves, tradable future first-round pick, their 2029, to Charlotte for the right to pay Mark Williams potentially this summer. I don't know if they're going to pay him, but he is extension eligible. I would imagine they pay him because they just spent significant draft capital to acquire him, and I don't think they're going to get much for him in a trade from somebody else. They also drafted Kamen Malawak in the draft, who is a player I really like. He's huge. He's a really good rebounder. And they also still have Nick Richards, right? So this is another team on this list that fielded a Nurk Eubanks front court and decided we will never again have a front court this mediocre to bad. Them and the Blazers just immediately were like, we cannot do that again. We can't do a Nurkic Eubanks thing again, and we have to immediately pivot to investing in this position on our roster. I just think that's kind of funny. The Los Angeles Clippers finally started utilizing Zubac full-time thanks to acquiring James Harden. I talked about this nonstop last season, that the best thing that Harden did for the Clippers when he joined them last year was take away Ty Lue's excuse for taking Zubac off the floor, which was his involvement in the offense, right? They also added Brook Lopez, presumably to be a backup to Zubac, right? So they have a real big ball 5 to play when Zubac is off the floor. And then just, was it yesterday morning? They traded Norm Powell in a 3-team deal to get John Collins. Now Norm is going to be a Miami Heat. And the Clips have been needing a real starting power forward for a while. I think this was true even... not this past season, but the year before that, because they were really worried about the fact that they had Kawhi playing starting power forward for a while, and then it was Amir Coffey for a while, and he's just like a young wing, and I think he did pretty well in that position, but they were the best defensive rebounding team this last season in the regular season, and then got absolutely pummeled on the glass in round 1 against Denver, where their defensive rebounding percentage fell from 73.5%, which led the league in the regular season, to just 66% in that series in the playoffs. For reference, that would have been the worst defensive rebounding rate in the regular season by margin. I think that's worse than last year's Thunder when they were the smallest team in the league and didn't have Isaiah Hartenstein. They didn't have a real starting center, unless you count Chet as that, but like his rebounding was not to the level it needed to be to make up for their collective, lack of that rebounding. So they felt they needed to get bigger in their front court, and they did, right? And they gave up their guy who was a fringe all-star. Like, he didn't make all-star, but Norm Powell was like the first alternate, I'm pretty sure, for the West. Yeah, so that was a pretty big move. So my question for the chat here is small ball just dead, right? Is it really Jokic? Is that why the West is loading up, or is small ball itself just dead? Because honestly, who cares about being switchy when you can just bludgeon the other team on the inside, on the glass, in the paint, just beat them up and completely overpower them and make them work, and until a Curry-like skill emerges. Yeah, that's true. Until you get something that completely defeats double big again. But when you're double big, you get to be the matchup problem instead of trying to match up with other teams. I think a lot of people talk about like, oh, we need to get bigger so that we can match up with other teams. But I think the teams that do the best, especially come playoff time, they're not just the ones that are like, we're matching up with whatever the other team is bringing to the table. We're able to withstand their blows. We're the ones dealing the blows. And I think that's how the Rockets treated their double big. So they're kind of the quintessential like example of it in my mind now, especially since the Timberwolves traded Cat, because it's really just like when Steven Adams is on the floor, we're grabbing like 50% of offensive rebounds, which is absurd. And that's a matchup problem. And that's a problem that Golden State didn't really solve over the course of that series. They just kind of got lucky that Ime didn't go to it enough, in my opinion. Exactly, Poppin. As you get more skilled bigs, then why would you ever go back to small ball? I do think that there is a difference between having real bigs that are good like creators and initiators versus just shooters, because you still need those players on the team. Like the interesting thing about all this these double big looks happening around the league is I think they actually make the role of the point guard even more important, because you need somebody that can organize all these trees and get everybody in their right spots and like generate coherent offense from all of this. So you don't play small ball, but I think some of your smaller players become more important as your front courts grow, right? I agree, she loved Tommy for that same reason. You'd think like, well, I mean, Steven Adams isn't a particularly skilled player, but you know what he's better at than like everybody else in the league by margin is offensive rebounding. And if you can't beat that, then that's a skill that you now have to, like, that's a thing on the scouting report you have to pay attention to. That's a matchup problem for you. Maybe. Not if they can't get their shots off, though. Especially if you play a team that doesn't let you generate threes. Like the Thunder. Or even the Orlando Magic, frankly, which their main, they're like a team that forces a lot of turnovers, but they're also a team that doesn't allow a lot of threes. It's one of the reasons that they play the Celtics so well. Now, I know they got gentlemen swept in that series, and it's largely because of their offense, but I thought their defense was actually pretty good. Cool. Let's see here. So yeah, we see teams generally putting more of their resources, like financially, into their front courts. Previously, outside of the top end guys, like we're talking Jokic, Giannis, Embiid, Cat, like where your best or second best player was a 4 or 5, it didn't feel like power forwards and centers, especially the depth guys, like off the bench, where teams were spending the limited money that they did spend on their depth. They would put it more into those bench wings and bench guards, right? And now it seems like, especially in the West, it's like, I mean, damn, Luke Cornett's making more money than TJ McConnell, for example, right? And arguably TJ McConnell, like, not even arguably, like, TJ McConnell's way more important for his team than Luke Cornett is. CT, we talked about this in the last segment, actually. It's definitely going to be Peyton and Julian. And Hunter will just never play. He will only play in garbage time ever, which is a good thing. Okay, let's see here. So the depth money is going to the bigs. Okay, here's another one. If everyone is big, then is nobody big? What does it look like when two teams that really lean into double big go against each other in a playoff series? What does it look like when the Rockets play the Wolves? Right? Where does the margin in terms of the matchup advantage come from when your biggest advantage gets mitigated? I personally think the Wolves would probably win that series, although their offense can get really yucky. The Rockets' offense is like, yeah. Then again, now they have Kevin Durant. What does that look like now that they have somebody that you actually trust to make tough shots? It is one of my like burning like stylistic questions about next year's West playoffs. This was something that Will and I talked about during the playoffs this year. Like the East became this like fast, high flying offensive conference. And then the West was this like disgusting defensive rock fight, like every series in the West. So I'm curious to see how the increased size across the conference sort of maybe augments that same trend going into the playoffs next year. Pop in the formula is young, tall, athletic, who pick you up full court, generating turnovers, get easy layups. Generating turnovers and getting easy layups is a great way to generate easy offense when your half court offense sucks. And that's how the Oklahoma City Thunder won the title this year. I would hesitate to say the formula, though, because I think there's more than one formula. I just think it is. It's great to have young, tall, athletic players who can do all that, but they also have to be like high IQ. They have to stay calm under pressure. They got to make shots sometimes. There's lots of things that players need to be able to do, to not get played off the floor. Without Valančiūnas, if he doesn't end up coming to Denver, do they become just the third smallest team in the entire Western Conference? That's 15 total teams, right? And I say third smallest because I think that even without Val, we're bigger than Golden State and probably bigger than the Lakers front court on aggregate, right? The Pelicans don't count because they're another team that I didn't mention. But they did add Kevon Looney to a young front court of Yves Missi and Derek Queen, who they just drafted, right? Troy Weaver's just like a kid in a candy shop over there, playing around with future draft picks to draft Derek Queen. And the Lakers, they still have Ayton, Hayes, and Maxi Kleber. We forget about him on the bench because he was injured for a large part of last season, just like he seems to be injured for a large part of most seasons these days. But they do have him as a potential option if he is healthy. And Denver just doesn't have that. If they don't have Jonas, they don't have a third big. And right now, they don't even really have a second big. I don't really count AG in that. Because he's not like... He was a bruising... I think he's the one who probably gets impacted by this the most in terms of how his game has changed. I think it's part of the reason that he, worked more on the perimeter last year. He's going up against bigger fours now. He used to be able to bully guys because every team was playing small ball, playing guards and wings at that four spot. But now he's playing against real fours and sometimes a guy who is basically a center playing the power forward position. So I'm kind of worried about AG, but also not because, the shot's coming along and I think he's going to evolve his game over time. But I'm worried about the dynamic of how he plays and it taking something away from the thing that Denver used to be like so good at, which was their physicality relative to their opponents just because they were bigger than you, right? And the Warriors are just small. They're courting Al Horford, but their starting center right now is Draymond Green. They were Quentin Post. He's going to be a second year coming off the bench. Trace Jackson Davis basically fell out of the rotation last year. And all of those guys are undersized except Quentin Post, right? So you see the dilemma that the front office is in, Denver's front office is, when you look at all these other teams loading up on good backup centers and backup forwards off their bench, right? I'm not talking about like Zubac's getting more minutes as a starting center only. They have good bigs off their bench, and Denver's bench front court situation is not great if they're not able to get Valančiūnas or come up with a close to that same caliber alternative solution. All right, let's see here. Any comments on how big the West is? Please remember to like and subscribe. All right, we are going to get to our mailbag segment next. Ooh, let's bring up the first question here. Or the like full mailbag segment in addition to the ones that I've already read. All right. Jakir asks, with Adelman likely implementing new offensive ideas, what do you think he should or will do with Jokic? Personally, I think Adelman should have Jokic run at least 5 pick-and-roll ball handling possessions per game. He only ran it 1.7 times per game in the, I'm assuming that means regular season, 79th percentile. That's not a lot of possessions. Shakir also adds, been thinking this for a while. The only real weakness in Jokic's arsenal is on-ball creation. The simplest way to do that is as the pick-and-roll ball handler, inverted pick-and-roll. And while that is harder when AG is injured, because AG is Jokic's lob threat, if we got Jonas or another center, or with Duran, he could improve on it. That's a really good point, Jake, here. I think that your idea is like, Jokic is still developing. He needs reps. He needs reps to work out this stuff. Now, Will and I have talked about some of the limitations with Jokic as the ball handler in pick and roll. It's a really nice curve ball most of the time because teams aren't when teams are not expecting it. But when you are expecting it, there are some really easy counters, especially when you're running it with AG or even Duran or even Jonas, which is teams could just put. They could just put two. If you're facing a team, especially in the West, they could put two bigs on the floor. They just switch it. And Jonas is not going to be like a hard slip and lob to the rim kind of threat. Like AG can be even, and maybe Duran becomes that. Like I'm really curious to see what his sort of twitchiness and fluidity and like how the vertical spacing looks in Summer League. Although I don't even know who the starting point guard is going to be in Summer League. I don't know if he's going to get a lot of lobs thrown to him. But your idea is like he needs to get more reps to get better at it. I think if he improves his pull-up jump shooting, it opens up more avenues for pick and roll with him to be a consistent threat and like consistently potent as opposed to only potent when it's a curveball that the defense isn't expecting. Because when he isn't a pull-up threat, either from 3 or even from the mid-range, like that would be something just as a curveball, because we know it's not going to be his bread and butter, but we want him to develop the ability to punish defenses that way consistently. It would just kind of do something to throw the defense off a little bit. Okay. First mailbag question from Omar here. Omar asks, who needs to go to prison for giving us that heartbreaking Mike video? So MPJ did make a really, in my opinion, emotional thank you Denver goodbye kind of video for Curious Mike. It's just like 10 minutes long. I really encourage you to go watch it. It made me pretty emotional. It sounded like he was getting choked up recording it, especially in the first like 5 minutes or so. He talked about how he found out that he was getting traded. It was just like text from the agent and like John Wallace. They were trying to get in contact with him. He was on a plane, so he didn't see the news, and he wasn't able to talk to them on the phone. So it was just that kind of thing. I did think that we got some interesting tidbits from that video, though. John Wallace apparently met up with Mike relatively recently. So here's me paraphrasing this segment here. Mike said, "I ran into John Wallace. I didn't even know that he was the newly appointed GM because I'm off social media." Very funny. I know John Wallace had been with the Nuggets before, but I wonder if Mike was wondering, like, oh, are you just back with the organization now? Because it was in Denver that they met up, it sounded like, and they were just talking about the team and stuff. But funny that MPJ is just having a whole conversation with this guy and doesn't know that he's the new, like, half GM along with Ben, right? He started telling me, you know, how we're going to build a team and who he wants to get, who he wants to surround us with, and who he wants in the second unit. He wants to find a point guard that could feed me the ball in the second unit. MPJ went on to say that he thinks John, quote, heard it in my voice that I wanted to grow my game, that I didn't want to plateau. This was like a running theme from this video, actually. I think MPJ knew to say, and I think he genuinely meant this. He was appreciative of, you know, operating within the two-man game with Jamal and Yoke and how it won them a championship. But he did keep reiterating how he felt that his game had hit a ceiling in Denver, his individual game. And that kind of makes it easier for me to, like, accept that he's going to be sent to Brooklyn, a place where he's just going to have more freedom to grow his game without the pressure of, like, competing for a title and, like, winning every night and all that. Now, I want to be clear that this doesn't seem like a situation where it's like, this guy is not a winning basketball player, this, that, or the other. I think he genuinely is appreciative of learning how to play within, like, this rigid, frankly, of a team system. He even says in a separate portion of the video that he, I'm going to get choked up talking about this. He was really appreciative of Malone for teaching him how to play the right way and for trusting him as a rookie and all of that. And MPJ in the past has also he's also reiterated his thankfulness for the situation that he was in with Denver, despite, you know, being a very highly sought after prospect coming out of high school and all that. And he has said, like, hey, I am really appreciative of the situation that I got put in, given, like, my injury history and all of that, because probably I was able to realize my potential more here than I probably would have been if I'd started out my career on a bad team. And I think he genuinely means that. But in this video here, you know, he's talking about how appreciative he is of being able to work within the system, but also, and I think part of it is like a little bit of cope, because he did get traded. It's not like he can change that. So he's trying to make the best of his situation going to Brooklyn. And I think the best way to look at that is, like, I have an opportunity to grow in areas of my game that, with the pressure that came with being a title contender in Denver, it's just like there's just not room for that, to make mistakes and learn from them in that way, because it's a team that's trying to win now. Wow. I did not think I would get emotional talking about this when I made my notes for this. So, gonna take a minute before I talk about this a little bit more. See if the chat has anything to say on that. I think we're going to, maybe not everybody, but I'm going to miss Mike. And I think the trade was a good one. I want to be clear about that. But, you know, he was our guy. So it's tough. Damn, I don't know how he made it through that video without actually crying. GP of St. John, yeah. After the third back surgery, though, he was pretty, he played through injury a lot. He also talked in the video about how he felt really bad that the sort of last thing that he got to do for Denver was play, with the shoulder injury and not be able to. He was trying to be there for his team, but he wasn't able to, play 100% because of the shoulder injury, and that was really sad. Dahlia, that was so funny to me when he said that. He had a whole conversation with this guy about all the things that he wanted to add to the team and got all excited and had no idea that John was the new one of the new GMs. Yeah. Yeah, she loved Tommy. Totally buy that. I do think it'll be good to get some fresh, blood around the team. And I can't even tell you everything that was in this video with MPJ, but one of the things that he brought up is that he and Cam Johnson are actually close friends. They've already talked since the trade, and they're like, oh, should we just swap homes and all of this kind of thing? So most MPJ thing to do for sure. So yeah, heartbreaking Mike video. Who should go to jail for it? Not Mike. That family's been through enough. But the other note that I had from this quote from MPJ about the conversation with John Wallace is was John Wallace actually talking about wanting to get a new backup point guard? Does that mean that Denver is still in the market for a backup point guard? Are they going to be, it doesn't seem like they're going to be getting one through free agency, because we haven't had any announcements or reports about that. Maybe they're looking to get one via trade. Ayo Dosunmu is definitely a name that's been brought up on the trade market, not necessarily linked to Denver, except by people like me and Swipa, who have been wanting Ayo for Denver for a couple of years now. Now my glasses are foggy. A couple of years now. But yeah. Let's see. But yeah, the other thing is maybe he was just saying things to MPJ, so maybe they're not looking for a new backup point guard. These new GMs are kind of liars. They lied to all of us about, not really doing much to the core of the team, only operating on the margins, focusing more on free agency than trades, and then making two pretty big trades in the first 2 days of free agency. It's part of why I kind of expect that despite their public posture about wanting to make Jonas honor his contract with Denver, I wouldn't be surprised at all that if they were working on a Jonas alternative behind the scenes. Because they have been very shadowy about their plans, for better or worse, right? You can say what you want about Calvin Booth, and I've said plenty. You always knew what he wanted and what he was doing, but sometimes that came back to bite the team in the butt when it came to, asset management and just not getting leveraged by other teams and agents, etc. So give and take. As it means that the media get less access to useful information if these guys aren't forthcoming about things, but it also means that stuff like the MPJ trade and the Jonas trade are able to happen. Let's see. All right, next mailbag question from She Loved Tommy. asks, how opposed are we to the idea of Ben Simmons? CJ thrived, that's Cam Johnson, thrived with him in Brooklyn. We only need 12 to 15 minutes of solid play. His defense and playmaking are still A tier. He can also play as a roller or short roller, baseline lob threat, or grab and go pace guy. He could be a wing replacement, or a ball handler. So, Sheila Tommy, I actually like the idea of Ben Simmons as a ball handler. Not so much a big. Like, if you had him as, like, the small ball big on the bench, I think you would probably have to have some better play finishers around him, because he, like, doesn't, forget about shooting. Like, he doesn't even look at the rim most of the time. But as a ball handler, I think he could be really useful. He's a good passer. He's a good rebounder, obviously a really good defender, very versatile in that sense. I would hesitate to go anything above a minimum, just because you don't want to get stuck if like, I don't know how great of, like, a locker room situation he is. My thing is, like, the fact that he's still available is kind of strange to me, because I thought he was pretty good for the Clippers at the end of last year, and I just kind of assumed that they were going to re-sign him. So the fact that they haven't is giving me a lot of pause, especially because Ty Lue loves to play small ball so much, and Ben Simmons somewhat enables that. Even though he's got his offensive limitations, he allows them to not have to play sort of more lumbering bigs. So I would just be curious to know, like, well, why aren't the Clippers interested? Like, that raises, like, my antenna a little bit. Let's see. All right, next mailbag here. Okay, so this is the last mailbag question, so guys, get your questions into the chat. We'll get to those for the last little bit of the show. All right, last mailbag questions from Omar. Omar asks, if you were to engineer some sort of Celtic pride scheme, which opposing superstar do you think would be the easiest to kidnap, and which one do you think would be most effective to guarantee Denver a win in the series? Great question, Omar. So if it has to be a superstar, I would absolutely, without question, kidnap Steph Curry. I would plaster NIMBYs against high-density housing flyers all around the Chase Center to lure him to an abandoned warehouse until the series was over. But if it could be any player, let me get this graphic ready here. If it could be any player, I would absolutely kidnap Alex Caruso. I'd be staking out a Raising Cane's, since he really likes their chicken fingers. And then I would use Aaron Gordon to seduce him into an alley out back. And that's when we'd get him into the van. Look at those eyes. And so, with that, I hope that answers your question sufficiently, Omar. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. Any other mailbag questions about Denver, about the rest of the offseason, questions about other teams? I had notes in here about some other teams, but I didn't want to get too deep into things like the Atlanta Hawks, because, you know, it's the East. Let's see. Al, you say Jokic would get so frustrated with Ben if what? Ben Simmons. I believe that. I agree with that too. And that would be my hesitation. Not only because he doesn't shoot, but just like, I just don't know what his like attitude is like. I don't know if he's going to be a good locker room guy. All right. Dahlia, do I think that we can beat the Wolves with this roster? I do. I do think we can beat the Wolves with this roster. It's a tough matchup, but I think that Denver's still a tough matchup for the Wolves too. I think they're just like two really good teams. But we have the best player. So it's just a matter of like be healthy. Jamal, don't be like worst of all time. And they could probably get through it. I would still be concerned about the defense more than the offense, honestly. Like with this roster, even though I still have some things that the offense could definitely improve upon. Say I would like us to get a new backup point guard, but the defense is what would concern me still in that series. Let's see. What did the Wolves even do? They lost Nikhil. They extended Nas, which was big because I thought that the Pistons or the Nets would make a run at Nas. And that would have been bad because the Wolves would have lost him for nothing, especially if it was to the Nets who have cap space. I'm surprised that they didn't go after him, honestly, because I think that he could just fit with what they're doing on that team. I think they still have. Do they not still have enough cap space? I think they had enough cap space. Maybe not to take both MPJ and actually no, because it's just the gap between his salary and Cam's. I think they could have gotten both, but I don't think the Nets are trying to be good right now. I just think he would have been a good asset to have. Maybe not on that contract, but especially if they could make him a starter. He's not going to be a starter on the Wolves, so I'm surprised. But the Wolves made, I think, a rather aggressive offer to Nas to get him to stay because it was a 5-year deal. No other team was going to offer him or could offer him, I think, a 5-year deal in free agency. But because the Wolves were extending him, they were able to offer him 5 years. Don't quote me on that because I think other teams might be able to offer 5 because he's a veteran. This isn't like a rookie extension situation. But I don't think any team would have offered Nas 5 years. So, like, I'm surprised that no other team made a run at him. But the Wolves did make a really aggressive offer to try to take that off the table. So, you know, kudos to them, I guess, for, like, being really aggressive and trying to keep their guy. Larry Salazar, Bonte is only 30, but he just, like, doesn't play. I don't know if it's like nagging injuries or what it is. Like he can't stay on the floor. He's also too small. It's the same reason we don't have Colin Gillespie anymore, honestly. I'd probably rather have Colin right now than Monte. And the Suns just signed Colin to a standard deal. That happened one of these mornings while I was sleeping. She Left Tommy asked, is Bruce's athletic decline in burst and vertical pop concerning? It is to me, but I looked it up and I'm like, man, Bruce had a 42-inch vertical measured at the draft combine. So that's what it is on paper. But I'm like, man, even if he's lost a step, the only 2 guys on this roster that can even compete with that are Christian and AG. And if he reaches his peak again, he's just got the highest vertical of the whole team. So, you know, it is concerning, but I also think the team is because we have so much wing depth now, the team is probably in a better situation to make up for it than they were even in 2023. So the hope is that he can get to like 80 or 90% of what he was in 2023. But he started from such a high baseline with the athleticism that I'm not worried that he's going to like stand out in a negative way on our team. But he might not pop as much as he used to, if that makes sense. Yeah, let's see. If you could pick Giannis or SGA to add to the Nuggets roster, which of those 2 would you pick? I really like what SGA can do on ball. My thing, like, the answer should be an obvious Giannis, but I don't necessarily trust him to buy into the role that we need, which is to be, like, MVP caliber AG, effectively. Be a lob threat, rebound, defend, all that. So I think I'd rather say SGA and then just move Jamal off ball full time, even though I think Jamal's a better playmaker than SGA. But having SGA as like that driving force, like consistent paint touch, I think would be it offensively. Should the Nuggets try to get Vooch? If they can't keep Val. Because I'd rather have Val. But, you know, depending on the advanced metric you look at, one of them is better or worse than the other. And it's just back and forth. Like, I've softened my position on that. I don't think that they should try hard to go get Vooch. Like, they shouldn't try to trade for him. Like, that's way too much cap to be on that player. I think it would put us over the first apron, which would eliminate us from being able to do some other things. But if the Bulls wanted to buy him out and we could sign him on like a minimum to $6 million, like in that range, fine. Other than that, like I don't think they should like full court press to try to get Vooch. Well, Poppin, I don't think that's true. Giannis is a bit more on ball juice. The thing is, like I think Giannis's defense, it was really good at the first half of last season to the point where I was like, he might be my preseason depoy. But as the season goes on, that becomes more and more overrated. I don't think he's as versatile as he used to be. Everyone saw the in the playoffs, the game-winning layup that Hallie got just blowing by Giannis, that, you know, when they cleared the side and all that. And I'm like, why are they guarding that with one person? Anyway, not great. But he's a better rebounder. He can play some small ball 5, and I'm not, like, concerned about it. Whereas with AG, you're like, I really don't want this guy to get injured. Yeah, that's how I feel about that. Let's see. All right. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, that's the end of the stream. And I somehow didn't make it 3 hours long. I guess my notes go further when I don't have to worry about somebody else having to talk to. Yeah, that's the thing. Is like he's not going to cut like AG. I don't really care about the shooting as much if he's able to buy into all the other roles on the interior and off ball. But I don't know that he's going to do it consistently, if that makes sense, instead of like kind of calling for the ball a lot. Maybe he has more shooting on the box, but yeah. All right. Well, thank you to everybody who made it this far. Really appreciate you guys and everybody who joined us in the chat today. Let's see, a comment from Larry Salazar, just throwing it out. I think Pickett would be adequate if we don't pick up another point guard. Maybe. I just think it's too big of a question mark for such an important position. Anyway, yeah, appreciate everybody who joined the chat today. Really, because, you know, with a solo show, like I need some friendship to help me get through it. Been watching a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh lately, and my gosh, was friendship like hammered like 5 times an episode. Is like friendship is so important. All right. Okay, let's get this started. Woo. If you like our content, please remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button and hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss any of our content. Leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music as well. Will is the one who does all the editing of episodes for the audio and all that, so a while. Follow us on socials. All our links are in the description.